Okay, we're back, and whoops, I advanced too far, and we're going to talk about the amphibians now. So now we're getting into the chordate, phylum Chordata, but we're getting into our terrestrial organisms. And so we're going to start with the class Amphibia. Okay? Now, just to remind you, the last video left off at talking about the lobe fin fishes and lungfish that we believe set the stage for the movement on the land. Remember, these guys were able to move around for short periods of time on land. When they were in a pond that was drying out, they could move to a pond that had more water, or dig in the mud, right, and go dormant until the rains come back, right, without drying out. Okay, so we believe, though, that having these structures in the limbs of the animals set the stage for animals with 4 limbs, which are called tetrapods. Tetra means 4, pods means legs. Okay, and so there had to be some other adaptations, though. So obviously these fish, lungfish and lobefin fish, so lungfish, they had these structures to be able to gulp air, right? It's harder to get oxygen from the air than it is through the water, actually. So that will set the stage for breathing on land. And then there's also, they had to prevent drying. So these fish do have a little bit of a thicker skin that we see. So there's a temporary prevention of drying, and they actually secrete mucus along their body, and that probably helped first, right? And then locomotion and reproduction on land. Now, when you move onto land, you have gravity to deal with, and gravity pushes you down. You don't have to deal with that in the water, right? So the vertebral column is also going to strengthen, get thicker. You've got hip and shoulder bones that can brace against the backbone, so the animal can hold its body up. And then we'll also see a thoracic cage develop to a cage around, a bony cage around the lungs to prevent the lungs from being crushed. And so again, a lot of this, it has to do with Hox genes. These are actually Hox genes 9 through 13. They work together to specify limb formation from the shoulders, where the scapula is, down to the fingers, right? Or if I had a picture of the leg bones, it would be from the pelvis to the toes, right? The hips to the toes. Okay, so it's just relatively simple changes in the Hox gene expression that provided this sequence of bony structure that we see in all the terrestrial vertebrates. Okay, so again, descent with modification. And there are some transitional taxa. We've talked about this before. So we do have the original fossil that we had was Anchathostega. These were animals that were around in the Devonian about 365 million years ago. They still possess gills like fish, but they had 4 limbs and free digits, meaning fingers like that you can wiggle. Okay, that's Anchathostega. And then in the mid-Permian, about 260 million years ago, the Permian is called the age of amphibians. So we always know the age of dinosaurs. Well, before them, it was the age of amphibians. And so these were a group of amphibians that were larger. They had thicker skin than today's amphibians. They mostly use lungs for breathing rather than their skin, because their skin was thicker. At the end of the Permian, they went extinct. And then that caused the rise of the reptiles. So that thicker skin may have set the stage for reptilia. And then our modern frogs, those that survived, were smaller. They probably had the thinner skin and stayed in the water. And this is what we're going to see today with our modern amphibians. Okay. Now, after, and we talked about this already, you guys saw Tiktaalik, right? And so in a more recent discovery, we discovered Tiktaalik, which shows even without the limbs, like Anchathostega had the actual legs, where here's a transition where we believe they have the lobe fin. And we see the same bony makeup with the legs that we have of terrestrial animals today. So again, that's another piece of the puzzle with transitional taxa from the water onto land. And Tiktaalik, we think, rose about 375 million years ago. We're around, again, in the Devonian. So there's just that transitional form between fish and amphibians. So let's go to our amphibians. Okay, so now we have, you know, we always had the bony skeleton, the jaw, so everything that you saw below here is true up here. But now we've got 4 limbs. That's one of the main things that we're going to see. But what we're going to see with the class Amphibia is that they are still tied to the water, right? So they successfully invaded land, but they have to return to water to reproduce because their fertilization is still external. You can see they still produce eggs outside of their body, which are really thin and need to be protected by the water and get oxygen from the water. So this is the female releasing her eggs, and as she does, the male releases his sperm. So he grasps her in order to make sure he's the closest male to her, and his sperm are fertilizing those eggs. And here you can see the delicacy of those eggs of the amphibians in the water. So they need some kind of water. It's in the water, in a pond, in a river, but even like in the rainforest, they can fertilize up in the trees, and the plants, the leaves actually hold cups of water. We start to see a 3-chambered heart now, 2 atria, 1 ventricle. So they're still mixing. Remember, go back to your vertebrate circulatory activity that you did. And so that's not the most efficient means of distributing oxygen around this closed circulatory system, but their skin can still absorb oxygen through the water because it's still very thin. So this is why they can't completely separate themselves from the water, also along with the external fertilization. And then they use buccal pumping forces air into the lungs. So when you did your work on the respiratory system, you saw negative pressure. We open the space in our lungs to reduce pressure so that air comes in, right? Boyle's law, volume increases, pressure goes down, air will come in. Here, what they do is they push air in. So they, in their mouth, create a positive pressure, right? And push it down into their lungs. And that's when you see a frog kind of, its lower, looks like its lower jaws pumping. What they're doing, that's the skin that's producing a positive pressure so they can fill it with air and push it down into their lungs. So a little bit different. They have aquatic larval stages. So these are called tadpoles, sometimes called polywogs. They're herbivorous at that stage, and they do have gills. So they have gills right back here. Okay, and as they grow, the tail and the gills get reabsorbed, and the limbs and the lungs appear on the inside. You can't see the lungs in there. Okay, until so they have several stages where the tadpole starts to reduce its tail, its limbs develop, and the head region really becomes the body. And now, once they develop all 4 legs, then they can move around on land, but they come back to the water to reproduce. So that's the class Amphibia. So again, you don't really have to know a lot of the detail of the rest, but I just wanted to show you. So frogs, we put frogs and toads are within the order Anura. Once the tadpole becomes the adult, it's carnivorous. Right, and so frogs tend to have smoother skin, long legs. They're really good swimmers and jumpers. They secrete a mucus for, it helps prevent them from drying out, but also for poison, for coloration, for camouflage, right? Toads have a similar body, but they have drier skin and shorter legs. So they can tolerate a little bit more dryness, get a little further away from water sources, but they still need it. And oftentimes they burrow in the soil, right? Some, not all, some frogs actually have parental care. So this is one from the rainforest carrying his tadpoles that hatched in the leaves back down to the river. Okay. One little known amphibian is a caecilian from Gymnophonia. They look like a snake because they're legless, but they're not snakes. They burrow underground, so they don't really need eyes. They're blind, and it's very moist in the tropics. So that's how they can prevent from drying out. They're different. Their fertilization, because they tend to be underground a lot, is internal, and they actually bear live young. There's about 150 species. Oh, and to nourish their young, they actually produce a substance. We call it a uterine milk, but it's not true milk like the mammals have. But they do nourish their young inside their body. Right? Yeah, that's what we'll leave. They're mostly found in tropical Africa, Southeast Asia. In our hemisphere, they're found in southern Mexico to northern Argentina, right? And they can live in streams, under debris, along root channels, so on. They're pretty cool looking animals. The order Chordata, these are salamanders and newts. They also tend to live in damp areas. When I'm digging in my garden, every once in a while I pull up a salamander. This one's a fire salamander. This is a real brightly colored one. A lot of them are kind of dull in coloration. They also have internal fertilization, but what they do is the male deposits a perm packet, and the female then picks it up, and she uses that for internal fertilization. They display what's called paedomorphosis. And what that means is that the adults tend to take on the larval characteristics. So remember, the larvae will have gills, and adults in most species lose the gills and they have lungs, right? But in some species like this, this is a salamander. This is actually a larval salamander. There are some newts though that retain those gills because they tend to live more in the water. So that's called paedomorphosis. All right, now let's move on to land. Fully onto land. This is the conquest of land that we see in our reptiles and birds. And so this PowerPoint will end at the birds, but then the next one goes into mammals, okay? So it all started with the amniote egg. Okay, again, we talked about this already, so it's a little review. It's a critical innovation. It shelters that embryo from drying out. So now animals can produce offspring or produce embryos outside of their body and not worry about them drying out on land, right? So this is what really broke the tide of water. So where again, the amphibians didn't get the amniote egg, so they still have to lay their eggs in water. This allows fertilization to occur. It's going to be internal fertilization, but then the embryo can develop within the shell where the egg was contained and resist drying out. So very important innovation. The egg evolved in the common ancestor of turtles, lizards, snakes, crocodiles, birds, and mammals. So there's this group of tetrapods then is collectively known as amniotes. Okay. And again, just to remind you of the layers of the eggs, we went over this when we did the reproductive systems. You might want to just remind yourself of these different layers. And also in the container on canvas that has the reproduction, it shows you how many of these layers have developed into the placenta. So mammals, except for monotremes, we don't lay an egg, but we do have, you'll recognize some of these terms like the chorion and the amnion, the allantois. We retain some of these membranes and they become part of the structure of the placenta. Okay. And just some pictures of different types of eggs. You might be used to chicken eggs, but remember, ostrich lays an egg. They're really thick because the big body of an ostrich has to sit on it. Snakes and other reptiles tend to have more leathery type eggs. Right? So again, sexual reproduction is the rule. You get greater genetic variation with that. Remember, for animals that are colonizing land, we learn this with the plants as well. that the water environment is much more stable. There's more stability in temperature. But when you get onto land, there's much more variety that's going on. The temperatures can change. You get rain, you get dryness. So you get a wide range of different environments that can occur. So genetic variation is important. Remember that the more variation you get in genetics and pairs of alleles, the more likely you have the ability to adapt to that changing environment, right? So it's easier to eliminate harmful alleles. And with sexual reproduction, it's going to be internal fertilization. And again, we see viviparity, where the embryo develops within the mother. That's mostly in the mammals. Okay, it can occur in some of the others. You'll see oviparity, sorry, so the egg gets laid outside of the body, and the embryo then develops within that egg. So that's like in birds. And that's an advantage that really helps to reduce the female's metabolic investment. In viviparity, the mother is nourishing the embryo. The mother, so it's some of her resources are going to the embryo. But in here, once she lays the egg, she's not providing any resources anymore. So the mother is able, she might have to protect the egg. So we might see some more parental investment. Okay, and then ovoviviparity, the eggs are covered in a thin shell that hatches inside of the mother, but it still doesn't receive nourishment from the mother. So it's more like this one. Okay, so she provides protection. So that might be in some snakes and things like that. And then the other key innovation is really important, a very thick skin. I mean, look at this. Let me go back here. I mean, look at this lizard. That is thick skin. You can tell just by looking at it, right? And then others, you get thick skin. We have a thick skin, right? Several layers of it, but then it might also be layered with feathers or fur or something like that, okay? The skin also develops a protein called keratin. That's a really tough protein, and that's kind of waterproof as well. So it prevents us from losing water through our skin. Gas exchange is going to take place in the lungs, and we get thoracic breathing. So we do the negative pressure. We're going to increase the space in our lungs, lower the pressure in our lungs, then air is going to come in. Okay. And then, of course, water conserving kidneys. And you saw this, the excretory system and how well we conserve water. Okay. So that brings us to, here's the amniote egg. All right, so then our class Mammalia is part of the amniote egg, and that'll be another lecture. But within Reptilia, these are snakes, lizards, and birds as well. They are all part of the amniote egg. So let's go, so in the past we called it the class Reptilia, but it's under revision. So it's even a little bit unclear in your textbook. And so sometimes now they're calling this the clade Reptilia. They're trying to figure out how to fit birds into there is the big thing, okay? So we'll just use class Reptilia and then the different orders, and then we'll use Aves as its own class. That's been the traditional way, okay? And that's, again, now this is a great cladogram because all of these traits that we've talked about, you can see that branching off. And seeing the different traits that make these different classes. Okay, so here we are in the Reptilia as well. So turtles and tortoises, lizards and snakes, crocodiles, and birds. Okay, so turtles and tortoises, it's called the order Testudines. They've been virtually unchanged for 200 million years. It's really interesting. So again, turtles, what we call turtles are actually called terrapins. They're the ones that spend time in the water. They can be marine or freshwater. Tortoises then are what are on land, okay? And they don't spend a lot of time in the water. So they're fully terrestrial. Turtles went back into the water. But they have a hard protective shell, very good at protecting them from predators. Makes it hard to walk on land, but very buoyant in the water. The vertebrae along the inside tend to fuse into the shell along with the ribs. And they don't have teeth, they just have like a sharp beak. And they can use it, but that can chop a finger off. And I know because I used to work with the tortoises at the zoo. We kept our fingers away, but they're very, very sharp beak. They can clip and chew a piece of carrot, a real thick carrot. So I'll leave it at that for the tortoises. Again, I'm not going to hold you, mostly I'm going to hold you to the class, okay? But Lepidosauria are your superorder. Lepidosauria are lizards and snakes. So order Squamata are lizards and snakes. And then we would branch off into families to get down into separate the snakes and lizards. But they have what's called a kinetic skull. They have more joints in their skull, so it's movable. And so you can see a snake here can eat something that's bigger than its own head because it can expand its jaw out. And then snakes don't have eyelids, but lizards do have movable eyelids, so you'll actually see them blink. Snakes, because the keratin is so thick, also with lizards on their skin, they need to shed their skin in order to help with growing. So you might have a snake or a lizard at home, and you get the skin that's shed. And in snakes, the shedding will also be right over the eye, so the eye cup here will shed off as well. And then they're nice and beautiful underneath. Right. And then we have the order Crocodilia. These are alligators and crocodiles. We've got a 4-chambered heart, right? And their teeth now are firm into their sockets, probably because they become much more predatory, okay? And they show parental care. They actually guard the nest, and they'll actually guard the babies as they come out. They're pretty much unchanged for 200 million years. So really interesting animals. Oh, one of the things with their teeth and sockets, that seems to be a characteristic shared with dinosaurs, right? And just for FYI, if you wanted information on dinosaurs, there you go. So they have these classes, Ornithischia and Saurischia. You can click on these to get more information. But Ornithischia are called bird hip dinosaurs. But birds did not evolve from them. Birds evolved from the Saurischians, which are here. And again, I'll let you read through that more if you want to figure out what that's all about. I'm not going to spend the class time and confuse you for the test. You don't need to know that. Okay. But that brings us to the evolution of our birds. So these are some of the these are actually dinosaurs. Our Archaeopteryx, we think, is one of the transition between dinosaurs and birds. So except for feathers themselves, which is this guy, he's very similar to dinosaurs. I should probably change that because new fossil evidence and molecular evidence is showing more dinosaurs than we thought actually had feathers. So I probably shouldn't say except for feathers. Feathers might have been the answer for dinosaurs for thermoregulation. So feathers are an extension of the scales of the skin, which we see in lizards and dinosaurs and things. They're an extension, and they help to trap heat. So it might have been that when the meteor hit the earth that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, again, it wasn't like an immediate thing, but the meteor, the impact hitting the earth stimulated many volcanoes, which put ash into the air, which blocked out the sun. And also the impact of the meteor hit and spread dirt and debris up into the air as well, which helped to block out the sun. And when you block out the sun, it gets cold, right? So those that had feathers may have first been used for display. We also now see in the fossil record, we can actually obtain pigment from the cells. There have been some cells that have survived. And we know that dinosaurs were colorful. And so it's possible that maybe feathers started for display and then helped with as the earth started trending colder. And then that evolved in the birds, and the birds use them for transportation, right? So this is Archaeopteryx, so its avian features are feathers with a wing and a tail, but its reptilian features are feathered wing and tail, so feathers on their wings and tail. Birds themselves don't actually have a tail, but they have feathers that look like tails, right? So Archaeopteryx had a tail, and that is a reptilian feature, right? And then he also had claws on its wings and a toothed beak. So these guys had teeth. Then we found this guy, Cardiopteryx zui. I think this one was found in China. So again, feathered wings and tails, just like Archaeopteryx, but also the tail is shortening, right? And then also tooth, beak, and wings. And then this guy, Confuciornis, I can't say that correctly, but that's from Confucius, so I know this one was discovered in China, right? No bony tail, like our birds today, no teeth in the beak, like our birds today, and of course feathers. This one was flightless and claws on wings, so that would be the reptilian feature. So we have a pretty good step-by-step fossil record of birds as well. Okay, so we're going to call it the class Aves. Again, they're changing this because I think they're going to just slide them in that they're a descendant of dinosaurs. This is more and more, as time goes on when I teach this, there's more and more evidence that it's dinosaurs. But the researchers, the scientists that are resisting that classification are the ornithologists, the people who study birds. They have a tie to the birds being unique. So we'll see as time goes on. So again, their feathers, they're modified scales. All right, and their feathers are used for display, also for warmth, and as well as they're an innovation for flying. But we think the innovation for flying was secondary to warmth. Okay, so we don't think the dinosaurs didn't get them for flight. They probably had them for maybe display and then warmth. And then, hey, you glide through, you jump from one tree limb to another, and you had feathers that help you glide and make it. That's going to set the stage now. That's natural selection for flight, right? If you're going to fly, you got to be light. So their skeleton tend to be hollow, right? And they're honeycombs, so they have these little braces of bone in between, and that helps to keep them strong, though. Sternum, remember you saw in the vertebrate skeleton, was really large for big, powerful flight muscles to attach. And again, no teeth. That helps to reduce weight, right? They actually have a reduction of organs as well. They have a single ovary instead of two. They don't have a urinary bladder, so they have to continuously release that uric acid, right? That helps to reduce weight. And then they have a much more breathing respiratory system. They still use negative pressure, but they have a series of air sacs all throughout, which allows for continuous fresh oxygen-rich air to flow over the lungs. The oxygen-rich air comes in, we use it, and then we breathe it out. So there's a moment where we don't have any gas exchange occurring, right? They have continuous gas exchange occurring. And again, you're going to be flying in the atmosphere where the pressure of oxygen is less. You need to do that. But again, look at the diversity in they really get this diversity in their bills, and that changes what they can eat. We've got filter feeders, fluid feeders, nectar, carnivorous, right? Filter feeders here, eating fish, eating fruits and seeds, really specializations. Okay, and here's showing you the bone structure. So this is just like the front limb bones of other vertebrates, humerus, ulnar, radius. We got carpals, we got metacarpals and phalanges. Okay, and then just the structure of the feathers. And here you can show the hollow bones. And these are the honeycomb type struts that are inside of there to strengthen it. Other bird characteristics, they have double circulation with a 4-chambered heart. So they have a 4-chambered heart just like crocodiles and mammals. Okay, again, probably to help with the distribution of oxygen because they're at altitude where there's less oxygen available. Many of them have very acute vision, like the hawks and eagles, raptors, right? So they can see sometimes a little mouse running by at a mile up in the air. Right? They brood their eggs. It means they take care of their eggs. They generally have a complex courtship. There's 28 orders. There's a lot of them, 9,600 species. So I'm not going to make you go through all of those. All righty. Okay, that's it for up through birds. And then the next video went over Mammalia, the last class within the phylum Chordata. All righty. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna try to turn off my laser.